I stared at her email for exactly 47 seconds before allowing myself to laugh. Cecilia Harmon, my husband's former assistant, current mistress, and the woman who'd helped dismantle my marriage, was requesting a recommendation for a senior management position at Blackwell Industries. My company. Did you see this? I called out to Margot, who was typing furiously at her desk just outside my office door. Margot had been my executive assistant for 5 years, long before I'd ascended to CEO. Long before everything fell apart and reconstructed itself into something stronger. Margot appeared in the doorway, reading glasses perched on her nose, her gray-streaked bob swinging as she tilted her head. The Harmon email? I flagged it as potentially concerning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Concerning isn't the word I'd use. I swiveled my monitor toward her. She wants me to recommend her for the VP of Operations position. The absolute audacity, Margot whispered, then straightened her blazer. In the fluorescent light of my corner office, 47 floors above Boston, her expression shifted from shock to a familiar protective anger. Should I draft a response, Ms. Blackwell? I smiled, turning back to my monitor. No need. I'll handle Ms. Harmon personally. 3 years ago, I would have deleted the email immediately, perhaps after printing it just to have the satisfaction of watching it burn in the antique brass wastebasket my grandfather had kept in this very office. 2 years ago, I might have forwarded it to my therapist as evidence of the boundless entitlement that seemed to follow certain people through life. But today I was Victoria Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries, and I knew exactly how to handle Cecilia Harmon. I clicked reply and typed a single line. My calendar shows availability this Thursday at 4:30 p.m. 15 minutes. Victoria Blackwell, CEO. The response came within 3 minutes. I'll be there. Thank you for your consideration. I closed my laptop with a soft click, allowing myself to lean back in my chair. Italian leather, custom made, a gift to myself after the divorce was finalized. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston spread beneath me like a kingdom I'd inherited then expanded. The Charles River glinting in the afternoon sun. Harvard's campus just visible in the distance. Margot, I called out. Schedule a background. Check update on Cecilia Harmon and move my Thursday 4:30 to the boardroom instead of my office. Theater of power? Margot asked, already tapping on her tablet. Precisely, I answered, turning to face the city again. And pull Michael's personnel file from archives. I want to review it before Thursday. Michael. Even saying his name still felt like pressing on a fading bruise. The pain no longer sharp, but the memory of it lingering just beneath the surface. Michael Blackwell, my husband of 11 years, former CFO of Blackwell Industries, the man who'd sworn to stand beside me as we expanded my family's company into a global technology leader. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The man who'd chosen his 28-year-old assistant over his wife, over his reputation, over the dynasty we were building together. The boardroom was excessive for a 15-minute meeting with one person, which was exactly why I'd chosen us. 70 feet of polished walnut stretched beneath crystal chandeliers, with seating for 34 executives around a table that had hosted 4 generations of Blackwell leadership. The Boston skyline provided a dramatic backdrop through windows designed to make everyone inside feel as though they were floating above the city. I arrived 20 minutes early, positioning myself at the head of the table, back to the windows, the late afternoon sun casting my shadow long across the glossy surface. I'd chosen my armor carefully, a crimson Armani suit that my divorce lawyer had once described as what the devil wears when she means business, paired with black Louboutins that added 4 unnecessary but psychologically valuable inches to my height, my hair, which Michael had always suggested I keep long, was now cut into a sharp bob that emphasized my cheekbones and the determined set of my jaw. The divorce diet that had initially hollowed my face had given way to a disciplined wellness regimen that left me stronger, more angular, more certain of the space I occupied. "Ms. Harmon has arrived," Margot announced through the intercom. "Security has issued her a visitor's badge." I opened the personnel file in front of me, though I'd memorized its contents the night before. "Send her up." Cecilia Harmon had spent exactly 7 months working directly beneath my husband before they began sleeping together. Another 3 months passed before I discovered their affair, not through confession or confrontation, but through the accidental discovery of receipts for jewelry I'd never received and hotel rooms I'd never visited. By the time I'd pieced everything together, they'd created an elaborate fantasy life alongside their professional one. Weekend trips explained away as business conferences. Late nights at the office that produced no tangible results. Emotional distance justified by stress over quarterly projections. The boardroom door opened, and there she stood. Cecilia Harmon, 5 years older than when I'd last seen her, but still possessing that same careful blend of professional polish and calculated vulnerability that had so effectively ensnared my husband. "Victoria," she said, then quickly corrected herself. "Ms. Blackwell, thank you for meeting with me." I didn't stand to greet her, merely gestured to a chair positioned precisely 13 seats away from me. "Ms. Harmon, please sit." She crossed the room with measured steps, her heels clicking against the marble flooring. Her navy pantsuit was well-tailored but not designer, aspirational rather than established. She carried a leather portfolio embossed with initials that weren't hers, a gift from Michael, perhaps. "Would you like water?" I asked, not reaching for the crystal pitcher positioned between us. "No, thank you." She settled into the chair, placing her portfolio precisely in front of her. "I appreciate you taking the time to—" "I've reviewed your application," I interrupted, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "It's quite thorough." Her hands betrayed a moment of anxiety, fingers briefly interlacing before flattening against the portfolio. "I've worked hard these past few years to build my qualifications." I allowed the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable, watching her squirm ever so slightly. Executive presence was something you either had or didn't. No amount of tailored clothing or practiced poise could manufacture it. "Tell me," I finally said, "what makes you believe you're qualified for a vice president position at Blackwell Industries?" She launched into a clearly rehearsed response about her post-Michael career trajectory, an assistant manager position at a tech startup, followed by a lateral move to a mid-sized competitor, culminating in her current role as operations director at a firm half the size of Blackwell's smallest subsidiary. I listened without interruption, studying the woman who had once studied my husband with equal intensity. What had she noticed about him first? His tendency to run his hand through his hair when thinking through complex problems? The way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was only pretending to listen? How he preferred coffee with precisely 1 ice cube to cool it to his ideal temperature? These were intimacies that belonged to me, stolen along with monogrammed shirts and weekend plans and the future I'd mapped out with mathematical precision, which is why I believe my experience with supply chain optimization would bring significant value to Blackwell's expansion into Southeast Asian markets, she concluded, her expression hopeful yet guarded. I nodded once, then opened my laptop. "I see you've maintained contact with Michael." The statement, not a question, caught her off guard. Her careful composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered. "We've remained on professional terms." "Interesting?" I turned my laptop toward her, displaying an email thread from her to Michael's personal account, dated just 3 weeks prior. "This doesn't strike me as particularly professional." Her eyes widened, scanning the messages that detailed their dinner plans and included a line about missing him during his business trip to London. "I don't understand how you—" "Mr. Blackwell's infidelity triggered certain clauses in our prenuptial agreement," I explained calmly. Digital monitoring was among them. When one uses company resources to conduct an affair, one forfeits certain expectations of privacy. Her cheeks flushed. That was 3 years ago. And yet, here we are. I closed my laptop. Tell me the real reason you're applying for this position, Ms. Harmon. She hesitated, recalibrating. I believe I'm qualified. You're not, I interjected flatly. Your resume shows someone with moderate success in middle management. The VP of Operations oversees more than 2,000 employees across 4 continents and manages a budget larger than the GDP of several small nations. You lack the experience, the education, and frankly, the capabilities required. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. With all due respect, Ms. Blackwell, I think you're letting personal history cloud your professional judgment. I allowed myself a small smile. On the contrary, I'm exercising extreme professional judgment by meeting with you at all. I'd hoped we could move past you sleeping with my husband while accepting a paycheck signed by me, past you accompanying him to our family's vacation home in Nantucket, past the two of you discussing my supposed shortcomings over dinners charged to the company card. I maintained an even tone, as though discussing quarterly projections rather than the implosion of my personal life. Her confidence visibly wavered. That's not why I'm here. Then enlighten me. She took a deep breath. Michael's firm is struggling. They've lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months. There are rumors of a potential bankruptcy filing. Ah, there it was. Not exactly what I'd expected, but close enough. So, you thought you'd secure a position here as, what, a safety net? A lifeboat for you and Michael? It's not like that. Her protest sounded hollow even to her own ears, if her expression was any indication. Michael always did prefer to solve problems through proxies rather than face them directly, I observed. It seems some habits remain unchanged. He doesn't know I'm here, she said quickly. Another lie. I opened the personnel file. Michael called 3 members of our board last week, seeking to mend fences. Coincidentally, all 3 have voting rights on executive appointments. Her composure cracked further. Victoria, Ms. Blackwell, I corrected. Ms. Blackwell, she amended. I understand why you might feel. You don't understand anything about how I feel, I stated with quiet certainty. 3 years ago, you helped dismantle the life I'd carefully constructed. You conspired with my husband to deceive me professionally and personally, and now you appear in my boardroom, seeking a position you're unqualified for, as part of what appears to be another deception. I stood, gathering my materials with unhurried movements. The answer is no, Ms. Harmon, not just to the recommendation, but to whatever game you and Michael are playing. She remained seated, her knuckles white against the dark leather of her portfolio. It wasn't a game, she said softly. Not to me. I paused, allowing myself to really look at her, not as the woman who'd slept with my husband, but as someone caught in Michael's gravitational pull, just as I had been all those years ago. Did she know yet that his attentiveness had an expiration date? That his passion faded precisely when challenges arose? That he collected people until they became inconvenient? Perhaps not to you, I conceded, surprising us both. But to Michael, it's always a game, and he's quite skilled at ensuring other people pay when he loses. She looked up, something unreadable crossing her features. He said you'd say something like that. I'm sure he did. I closed the personnel file with finality. Tell me, what else did Michael predict about this meeting? Her hesitation told me everything. He thought you might be difficult. I laughed then, genuinely amused. Difficult? How wonderfully reductive. I moved toward the door, then turned back. For the record, Ms. Harmon, had you applied through proper channels, demonstrated appropriate qualifications, and not been sleeping with my ex-husband, I would have evaluated your candidacy on its merits. Don't believe that, she said, a flash of the backbone that had likely attracted Michael in the first place. Your belief is irrelevant, I replied. As is your application. Security will escort you out. As if on cue, the boardroom door opened, revealing 2 members of our executive protection team. I nodded to them, then addressed Cecilia one final time. I suggest you reconsider your allegiances, Ms. Harmon. Michael Blackwell has a habit of sinking ships and leaving others to drown. 3 hours later, I was still at my desk, reviewing acquisition proposals for a promising artificial intelligence startup in Cambridge. The office had emptied, leaving only security personnel and the cleaning staff moving quietly through the corridors. The meeting with Cecilia had lasted precisely 11 minutes, 4 minutes shorter than scheduled, but more than enough to deliver my message. My phone vibrated against the desk, Michael's name illuminating the screen. After our divorce, I'd removed his contact information, but some numbers you never truly forget, like the combination to your first bike lock or the address of your childhood home. Some things imprint themselves whether you want them to or not. I let it ring 4 times before answering with a crisp, Blackwell. Really, Vic? His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm bourbon over ice, smooth with an underlying burn. You couldn't give her 15 minutes of actual consideration? I continued reviewing the documents before me, making a note in the margin about intellectual property protections. Good evening, Michael. I see Ms. Harmon has already reported back. You humiliated her. I declined to recommend an unqualified candidate for an executive position. If she felt humiliated, perhaps she should examine why she placed herself in that situation. He sighed, the sound crackling through the connection. Always so literal, so black and white. It's exhausting. And yet you called, I observed. To what do I owe the pleasure after? How long has it been? 8 months since the technology, licensing disposition hearing? There was a pause, then. I need to see you. A younger version of myself, the Victoria who had built her life around this man's needs and whims, might have felt a flutter of hopeful anticipation at those words. That Victoria had died a necessary death 3 years ago, replaced by someone more discerning, more self-possessed. That won't be possible, I replied evenly. If you have business concerns, direct them to our legal department. It's not about business, Vic. It's personal. I set down my pen. We don't have personal matters anymore, Michael. You ensured that when you moved your personal belongings and your 28-year-old assistant into the Beacon Hill house. That's not fair. Neither was finding another woman's lingerie in my dresser drawer, yet here we are. I kept my voice, neutral, refusing to give him the emotional response he was seeking. State your purpose or I'm ending this call. He exhaled slowly, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair, now peppered with gray at the temples if recent Boston Business Journal photographs were accurate. My firm is in trouble. So I've heard. I need an investor. When I didn't immediately respond, he continued. No one understands the biotech security market like you do, Vic. No one else would recognize the value underlying our current difficulties. You mean no one else would overlook 3 consecutive quarters of losses, the departure of your chief research officer, and the pending class action lawsuit from your Series B investors? I allowed myself a small smile. Yes, I imagine that. Narrows your options considerably. You've been monitoring my company, he said, sounding almost pleased. I monitor all competitors, Michael. Don't flatter yourself by thinking it's personal interest. Another pause, longer this time. Have dinner with me tomorrow. The Oak Room, just like old times. Let me walk you through the numbers, show you what we're building. It's revolutionary, Vic. Exactly the kind of project that gets your analytical mind firing. There it was. The perfect blend of nostalgia, challenge, and flattery that had been his preferred method for navigating my defenses. Throughout our marriage, Once it had been nearly foolproof. Now it was merely transparent. The Oak Room closed last year, I informed him. And I have neither the time nor the inclination to invest in your failing venture. Victoria, please. His voice dropped, taking on the intimate quality he reserved for his most persuasive moments. I wouldn't ask if I had any other options. You know that. I know that you've exhausted all other potential investors and are now turning to the person you betrayed most profoundly. As a last resort, I corrected him. It's almost poetic in its desperation. Through the phone, I heard the distinctive clink of ice against crystal, his tell when stress began overwhelming his carefully cultivated charm. You always did enjoy watching me grovel. On the contrary, I find it rather pathetic. I glanced at my watch. Is there anything else? I have an actual business to run. Just dinner, he pressed. 1 hour of your time. If you're not interested after that, I'll never bother you again. I considered his offer, weighing it against the intelligence I'd already gathered about his company's precarious position. Something wasn't adding up. Michael was too calculating to stake everything on such an obvious long shot. Send the prospectus to my office, I finally said. All financials, research data, and patent applications. If, and only if, I find something of interest, I'll consider a brief meeting. The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank you, Vic. You won't regret it. I already do, I replied, ending the call before he could respond. I set the phone down and turned my chair to face the nighttime skyline, city lights reflecting off the harbor in the distance. The conversation had left a familiar residue of manipulation and half-truths, Michael's specialty. Whatever game he was playing now, it involved more than a desperate bid for investment. Michael never approached problems directly. He created elaborate peripheral strategies, moving pieces around the board until his actual objective became feasible. My intercom buzzed. Ms. Blackwell? Margot's voice still at her desk despite the late hour. I have that information you requested on Helix Biomedical. Helix Biomedical, Michael's company, formed shortly after our divorce with seed funding, that had mysteriously materialized despite the significant financial penalties he'd incurred for violating our prenuptial agreement. Send it in, I instructed. Moments later, Margot appeared with a thick file folder. These just arrived from our intelligence division. Preliminary assessment suggests Helix has been developing a security protocol for pharmaceutical trials that overlaps with our own biotech initiatives. I accepted the folder, noting the red confidential stamp across its cover. They're patent applications. That's what's interesting, Margot said, tapping the folder. They haven't filed any, at least not under Helix Biomedical's name, but there's a shell company that submitted 3 applications last quarter with remarkable similarities. To research conducted at Blackwell's Cambridge laboratory, I felt a cold certainty settle in my chest. He's trying to steal our technology. It appears that way, Margot confirmed, though the connections are carefully obscured. It would take significant resources to prove definitively. And now he's seeking investment from us, I murmured, piecing together the strategy. Access to our systems, our research, our security protocols. A Trojan horse, Margot suggested. With Cecilia Harmon positioned as a potential inside agent, I added, the full picture becoming clear. Schedule a meeting with legal tomorrow morning. I want to know exactly what Michael's endgame might be and how we protect ourselves. After Margot departed, I opened the folder and began methodically reviewing its contents, searching for the pattern Michael believed I wouldn't recognize. Each page confirmed my suspicions. He wasn't seeking salvation for his failing company. He was orchestrating an elaborate corporate espionage operation with Blackwell Industries as the target. My phone vibrated with an incoming text message from an unknown number. I should have told you everything from the beginning. Can we meet? Cecilia. I stared at the message, considering the possibilities. Was this another angle in Michael's strategy? Or was his carefully constructed plan already showing cracks? Either way, it presented an opportunity, one I intended to exploit fully. "I'll be at Cafe Nero on Newberry Street tomorrow, 7:30 a.m., I typed in response. "Come alone." Then I returned to the file, meticulously building my understanding of the threat Michael posed not just to me personally, but to the company my great-grandfather had founded. My grandfather had expanded, my father had modernized, and I had transformed into a global technology leader. Michael had once told me that my dedication to Blackwell Industries bordered on obsession. He'd meant it as criticism, a suggestion that my priorities were misaligned. Now, that same dedication would be his undoing. By midnight, I had constructed a preliminary defense strategy. By 2 a.m., that strategy had evolved into something more aggressive, a counterattack that would exploit every weakness in Michael's plan while revealing none of mine. As I finally prepared to leave the office, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. Poised, focused, resolute. The woman Michael had married wouldn't have recognized the threat he posed until it was too late. The woman he'd betrayed wouldn't have had the strength to fight back. But the woman I'd become? She was ready for war. Cafe Nero bustled with the morning rush. Young professionals clutching leather portfolios, students with backpacks slung over shoulders, tourists consulting digital maps. I'd chosen the location deliberately, public enough to discourage dramatics, but with the corner alcove that offered sufficient privacy for confidential conversations. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table with clear sightlines to both entrances. The staff knew me well enough to deliver my usual without prompting, a double espresso and sparkling water, no ice. At precisely 7:28 a.m., Cecilia entered through the Newberry Street door, her confidence visibly diminished from our boardroom encounter. She scanned the cafe twice before spotting me, her posture straightening as she approached. "You came," she said, sounding surprised as she slid into the seat across from me. I said I would. I gestured to the waiting chair. "You have 20 minutes." She ordered a latte when the server approached, then waited until we were alone again. "What I'm about to tell you could destroy my relationship with Michael." "That presumes I care about your relationship with my ex-husband," I replied, checking. My watch. 19 minutes. Her hands twisted nervously around her paper napkin. "Michael's company is developing a security protocol for pharmaceutical trials." "I'm aware. What you may not know is that the core technology was acquired from Blackwell Industries. I betrayed no reaction, though this direct confirmation was valuable." "Stolen, you mean?" "Not exactly." She lowered her voice. "They hired 3 engineers from your Cambridge laboratory last year. They brought proprietary knowledge with them." "Which constitutes intellectual property theft," I countered. "Why are you telling me this?" Cecilia's latte arrived, and she rapped, her hands around the mug as if seeking warmth despite the mild September morning. "Because Michael plans to sue Blackwell Industries for patent infringement once his applications are approved." I allowed myself a small, incredulous laugh. "Sue us for infringing on technology he stole from us? That's ambitious even for Michael." "The engineers modified the original algorithms enough to make them legally distinct. At least, that's what their lawyers believe." She took a sip of her latte, leaving a crescent of foam on her upper lip that she quickly wiped away. "The plan is to force Blackwell into a costly legal battle that ends in an acquisition offer." "A hostile takeover disguised as a legal settlement," I observed. The strategy was classic Michael, indirect, complex, and reliant on others executing. His vision while he maintained plausible deniability. "And your role in this scheme?" Her gaze dropped to the table. "I was supposed to secure a position that would give me access to your current research. Provide evidence that Blackwell continued developing technology similar to what Helix has patented. Hence the application for VP of Operations." I studied her, searching for the tells that would reveal whether this confession was genuine or Simply the next phase of Michael's strategy. Why the change of heart, Ms. Harmon? She looked up, something hardening in her expression. Yesterday, after our meeting, I overheard Michael talking to one of the engineers. They were discussing contingency plans if I failed to get the position. Which you did. Yes. She twisted her coffee mug in a slow circle. The contingency plan involves me taking the fall if the lawsuit goes badly. There are emails from me. To the engineers, meetings I organized, all carefully documented to make it appear I orchestrated the technology transfer without Michael's knowledge. Ah. Self-preservation, then. The most reliable of motivations. That sounds consistent with Michael's approach to adversity, I said, recalling how quickly he'd shifted blame during our marriage whenever challenges arose. He's creating a scapegoat. Exactly. Her voice carried a tremble of genuine fear. I found documents on his laptop, a draft press release announcing my termination for corporate espionage, statements from shocked board members. It's all prepared, just waiting for the right moment. I leaned back, considering her revelation. What do you want from me, Ms. Harmon? Protection, she answered immediately. And immunity if this goes to court. In exchange for? Everything. I know about Helix's operation. Access to emails, research documents, meeting recordings. I've been documenting everything for months as my own insurance policy. I allowed a hint of surprise to show on my face. Perhaps I'd underestimated her. Why not simply leave? Find employment elsewhere? Distance yourself from the situation? Michael would never allow that, she said with quiet certainty. She stopped herself, seeming to reconsider her words. He what? I pressed. She hesitated, then rolled up, her sleeve revealing a bracelet of yellowing bruises around her wrist. He likes control. I felt a cold stillness settle over me. The Michael I'd known had been manipulative, selfish, unfaithful, but never physically violent. Either he'd hidden this aspect completely during our marriage, or he'd evolved into something more dangerous in the years since our divorce. How long? I asked, my voice neutral despite the anger coiling inside me. It started about a year ago, she replied, rolling her sleeve down. After the first round of investors pulled out, he said I wasn't being supportive enough. A familiar justification. I'd heard variations whenever I questioned his business decisions or spending habits during our marriage. The disappointment was never his failure. It was always someone else's inadequate support. Do you have documentation of the abuse? She nodded, pulling a thumb drive from her purse and sliding it across the table. Photos, hospital intake forms, a police report I filed but withdrew when he threatened to ruin my career. It's all there, along with what I've gathered about the Helix operation. I made no move to take the drive. Why come to me? Why not go directly to the authorities? Because Michael has 3 former FBI agents on his security team and a brother-in-law who's an assistant district attorney, she explained. But mostly because you're the only person I've met who isn't afraid of him. I considered her words, weighing the risk that this was an elaborate trap against the potential value of what she offered. People like Michael maintained power through isolation, convincing each person in their orbit that they stood alone against his influence. Breaking that isolation often revealed how fragile such power actually was. I'll need to verify your claims, I said finally, taking the thumb drive and slipping it into my jacket pocket. If what you've told me is accurate, I can arrange protection. If you're lying, I'm not. Her interruption carried the desperate conviction of someone who had run out of alternatives. I'll sign whatever documents your lawyers require. I just want out. I nodded once, then removed a business card from my wallet. Not my standard corporate card, but a plain one with only a phone number. Call this number at precisely 4 p.m. today. The person who answers will give you instructions. Follow. Them exactly. She accepted the card, studying the number. What about Michael? He expects a report on our meeting. Tell him I expressed interest in discussing potential synergies between our companies, I replied. that I suggested Helix might qualify for Blackwell's Emerging Technology Incubator program. Her eyes widened slightly. He'll pursue that immediately. I'm counting on it. I stood, gathering my handbag. One more thing. If you contact Michael or anyone else about our arrangement, it becomes void. Is that understood? She nodded solemnly. Completely. I left her sitting at the table, her latte barely touched, the business card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. As I exited onto Newberry Street, I placed a call to a number few people had access to. Xavier, I said when the line connected. I have an assignment that requires your particular expertise. Back at Blackwell headquarters, I convened an emergency meeting with our 3 most senior security executives, our general counsel, and the head of our digital forensics team. The thumb drive Cecilia had provided was being analyzed in a secure, isolated system to prevent any potential malware from compromising our network. Initial findings confirm Ms. Harmon's claims, reported Diane Chen, our Chief Information Security Officer, sliding a tablet across the conference table. The engineers, she identified, Farouk, Jensen, and Takahashi, all left Blackwell under seemingly normal circumstances last year. Exit interviews showed no red flags, added Marcus Wellington, head of human resources. All cited new opportunities or career advancement as their reasons for leaving. What they didn't mention, Diane continued, was that all 3 had downloaded significant portions of our pharmaceutical security protocols in the weeks before their departures. We've identified unique code signatures from our proprietary algorithms in the Helix patent applications. I reviewed the evidence on the tablet, each screen confirming what I'd suspected. And the personal material Ms. Harmon provided? There was an uncomfortable shift in the room's atmosphere. James Forrester, our general counsel, cleared his throat. The documentation of domestic abuse appears genuine. Hospital records, photographs time-stamped over an 8-month period. There's also concerning evidence of financial control, joint accounts that only Mr. Blackwell can access, credit cards he can remotely disable. Classic abuser tactics, noted Sofia Rodriguez, our head of executive protection. Isolation, financial control, intermittent physical intimidation. The pattern is textbook. I processed this information with a growing sense of unease. Had I missed signs during our marriage? Or had Michael's darkness emerged only after our divorce? These questions, while troubling, were ultimately irrelevant to the task at hand. Our priorities are threefold, I announced, setting the tablet aside. First, secure our intellectual property and document the theft. Second, protect Ms. Harmon if her information proves reliable. Third, neutralize the threat Helix poses to Blackwell Industries. Ms. Blackwell, James interjected cautiously, given your personal history with Michael Blackwell, perhaps you should recuse yourself from— That won't be necessary. I cut him off with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My personal history with Michael gives me unique insight into his methods. Besides, this is a matter of corporate security, not personal vendetta. The slight flush in James's cheeks suggested he recognized the rebuke, but was professional enough not to challenge it further. Good. I had neither the time nor the patience for hand-wringing about conflicts of interest. Xavier is handling Ms. Harmon's extraction, I continued. She'll be relocated to our Montreal facility this evening under the guise of a potential partnership discussion. I want our legal team prepared to file emergency injunctions against Helix's patent applications the moment we have sufficient evidence. And Michael Blackwell himself? Sophia asked, her expression carefully neutral. Will be joining me for dinner tomorrow night to discuss potential investment opportunities, I replied. I believe the Oak Room at the Fairmont would be an appropriate venue, private enough for confidential business discussions, public enough to discourage any unfortunate behavior. Sophia nodded, making a note on her tablet. I'll arrange appropriate security. Discreetly, I emphasized. Michael needs to believe he's successfully manipulating the situation. I turned to Diane. I want every digital communication between Helix and those engineers monitored. If there's a server vulnerability we can exploit legally, find it. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed to execute their assignments, I remained seated, staring at the evidence compiled on the tablet. A notification appeared. The lab had completed their analysis of the thumb drive's contents. No malware detected, data authenticated. Cecilia Harmon, it seemed, had been telling the truth. My phone vibrated with an incoming message from Michael. Dinner confirmed tomorrow, 8 p.m. Looking forward to reconnecting. We make a formidable team when aligned. The presumption was so typically Michael that I almost laughed. Even now, he believed I could be drawn back into his orbit, that some residual affection or loyalty would overcome my business judgment. This fundamental misreading of my character had always been his blind spot. He projected his own transactional approach to relationships onto everyone around him, unable to conceive that others might be motivated by principles beyond immediate self-interest. I didn't bother responding to his message. Instead, I called Margot into my office. I need you to prepare a comprehensive profile on Helix Biomedical, I instructed. Investors, board members, strategic partnerships, particularly any connections to our existing clients or competitors. Margot nodded, making notes on her ever-present tablet. Anything specific you're looking for? Vulnerabilities, I replied. Financial pressures, governance conflicts, regulatory concerns, anything we could leverage if necessary. And if Michael calls again, tell him I'm in meetings all day but looking forward to our dinner tomorrow. I turned to my computer, already moving on to other priorities. Also, contact Dr. Lin at our Cambridge laboratory. I want a full briefing on the current state of our pharmaceutical security protocols, especially any advancements made since Farouk, Jensen, and Takahashi departed. After Margot left, I opened my secure email to find a message from Xavier. Package secured. Transporting to designated location. No complications. Cecilia was safely in our protection then. One piece successfully moved on the chessboard. I spent the remainder of the morning reviewing acquisition proposals and quarterly projections. The routine business of running a global technology corporation couldn't pause for personal vendettas, no matter how justified. At precisely noon, my private line rang. She's settled in Montreal, Xavier reported without preamble. Initial debrief confirms previous intelligence. She's provided access to cloud storage containing additional evidence. Any signs of surveillance during the extraction? I asked. Nothing concrete, but I noticed a black Audi circling the pickup. Location. Could be coincidence. Could be Michael's security team. I made a mental note to enhance our own surveillance. Keep her comfortable but secure. No outside communications until we've verified everything. Understood, Xavier replied. There's one more thing you should know. During the debrief, she mentioned overhearing a conversation between Michael and someone named Carson about leveraging something called Project Daedalus against Blackwell if the patent strategy fails. I froze. Project Daedalus had been our most classified research initiative, a quantum encryption protocol developed for pharmaceutical trial security that we'd abandoned 3 years ago due to ethical concerns raised by our board. The project files had been compartmentalized, accessible only to senior executives and the specific research team. When did she overhear this conversation? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Last week, during a late-night strategy session at Michael's home office. She claims not to know what it refers to, but thought you should be aware. Thank you, Xavier. Continue as planned. I ended the call and immediately pulled up the Project Daedalus files on my secure server. The access logs showed no unauthorized entry, but that meant little if someone had obtained physical copies or if a team member had memorized key components. I dialed Dr. Lin's direct line. Catherine, I need to know if anyone has attempted to recreate or build upon the Daedalus encryption protocol since we shelved it. There was a pause before she answered. That's an interesting question, Victoria. We detected some unusual queries against our research database last month. Someone searching for quantum encryption parameters similar to what we developed for Daedalus. Our security team traced the IP address to a coffee shop in Cambridge, but the trail went cold there. Who from the original Daedalus team is still with us? Just myself and Dr. Park. The others either retired or moved to other institutions. Her voice took on a concerned tone. Victoria, if someone is trying to rebuild Daedalus, we should be extremely concerned. You remember why we discontinued the project? I did remember, vividly. The encryption protocol we'd developed had proven too effective, potentially creating an unbreakable shield that could be used to hide illegal pharmaceutical trials from regulatory oversight. The ethical implications had been troubling enough that even I had agreed with the board's decision to archive the research. Implement blackout protocol on all Daedalus-related materials, I instructed, and prepare a briefing on what would be required to detect if someone were attempting to deploy the protocol in a live environment. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair, recalibrating my assessment of the threat Michael posed. If he had somehow obtained the Daedalus protocols, he wasn't just aiming to force an acquisition through patent litigation. He was positioning himself to offer pharmaceutical companies a way to conduct trials without regulatory scrutiny. The potential market was enormous and terrifying. My intercom buzzed. Ms. Blackwell, Mr. Rodriguez from the SEC is online too. He says it's regarding an anonymous tip about Helix Biomedical. I allowed myself a small smile. The pieces were beginning to move. Put him through. Ms. Blackwell, Rodriguez began, his tone professionally cordial. I apologize for the interruption, but we've received concerning information about potential securities violations involving Helix Biomedical and their recent investor communications. Given Blackwell Industries' position in the biotech security sector, I thought you might have relevant insights. How fortuitous, I replied smoothly. As it happens, our compliance team has been conducting due diligence on Helix in relation to a potential business arrangement. We've encountered some irregularities that might interest your office. I'd be very interested in reviewing that information, Rodriguez said, a new alertness in his voice. Of course. We're committed to regulatory transparency. My team will prepare a complete briefing for you. I paused deliberately. Though I should mention that I'm meeting with Helix's CEO tomorrow evening to discuss these very concerns. Perhaps we should connect afterward. That would be acceptable, Rodriguez agreed. Please understand, Ms. Blackwell, this is a preliminary inquiry. We're not suggesting any definitive wrongdoing at this stage. Naturally, I assured him. Blackwell, Industries values our relationship with the Commission. We'll provide any assistance required. After concluding the call, I sent a brief message to our security team. SEC contact established. Accelerate documentation of intellectual property theft. Prepare evidence package for potential regulatory submission. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of strategic preparation. Our legal team drafted emergency injunctions. Our security team enhanced surveillance around both our Cambridge laboratory and Helix's headquarters. And our financial analysts compiled a detailed assessment of Helix's increasingly precarious position. By evening, a clear picture had emerged. Michael's company was 3 months from insolvency, having burned through its Series B funding with minimal progress toward marketable products. Their last-ditch strategy, stealing our technology, patenting modified versions, then suing us for infringement, was the desperate gambit of a failing enterprise. At 7 p.m., as I prepared to leave the office, Margot appeared in my doorway with a final update. Ms. Harmon has provided access to Michael's calendar. He has meetings scheduled tomorrow with 3 pharmaceutical companies known for conducting controversial trials in jurisdictions with limited oversight. Names? Neurovital, Chimera Therapeutics, and Biosolve International. I recognized all. 3. Companies that had faced regulatory scrutiny for ethical violations, but had escaped serious consequences through legal maneuvering and jurisdictional arbitrage. Exactly the kind of clients who might be interested in an unbreakable encryption protocol that could shield their activities from regulatory scrutiny. Contact our representatives on the FDA's Technology Advisory Committee, I instructed. Alert them to potential attempts to circumvent trial transparency requirements through advanced encryption. No specifics, just a general warning. As Margot departed, I gathered my things and prepared for the evening ahead. Tomorrow's dinner with Michael would be a delicate performance. I needed to appear receptive enough to his proposal to keep him talking while gathering sufficient evidence of his intentions to justify the countermeasures already in motion. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Subject agitated after package extraction. Increased security at primary residence and office. Proceeding with surveillance. As directed. Xavier's team was in position then. In the elevator descending to the private garage beneath the building, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished steel doors. Composed, focused, resolute. The woman Michael had married would have been devastated by his betrayal. The woman he'd divorced might have sought emotional vengeance. But the woman I'd become? She understood that the most effective revenge wasn't emotional at all. It was strategic, methodical, and ultimately, complete. The elevator doors opened to reveal my waiting car, driver standing at attention beside the rear door. Tomorrow, Michael would discover just how thoroughly he had underestimated me, not just as an ex-wife, but as an adversary. The Fairmont's private dining room provided the perfect backdrop for the evening's performance, intimate enough for confidential discussion, yet staffed by attentive servers who would serve as unwitting witnesses if necessary. I'd arranged for our table to be positioned near a decorative mirror, allowing me to monitor the room without obviously scanning for threats. I arrived 20 minutes early, using the time to review the intelligence gathered over the past 24 hours. Helix's financial situation was even more precarious than initially assessed. They had missed their last payroll, disguising it as a system error that would be corrected the following week. Their primary research facility in Kendall Square had quietly begun selling off equipment. 3 board members had resigned in the past month. Michael was captaining a sinking ship, and tonight he would try to convince me to climb aboard. The maitre. Dee appeared in the doorway. Ms. Blackwell, Mr. Blackwell has arrived. I closed the financial report on my tablet, slipping it into my handbag. Please show him in. Michael entered with the practiced confidence that had once charmed investors and partners alike, shoulders back, stride purposeful, smile calibrated to suggest both authority and approachability. His bespoke suit hung slightly looser than it should have, suggesting recent weight loss. The watch on his wrist was the Patek Philippe I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, a calculated choice meant to evoke shared history. Victoria. He leaned in as if to kiss my cheek, stopping short when I didn't move to reciprocate. You look remarkable, as always. Michael. I gestured to the chair across from mine. Shall we order first? I have an early meeting tomorrow. A flicker of annoyance crossed his features before his smile reasserted itself. Still all business. Some things never change. We ordered salmon for me, steak for him, a bottle of the Bordeaux he'd always preferred. Once the sommelier had poured and departed, Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he reserved for persuasion. I appreciate you meeting with me, Vic. I know our history makes this complicated. Not at all, I replied, taking a measured sip of my water. Business is business. He chuckled, a rich sound that once would have warmed me. And yet, here we are, after hours, in a private dining room instead of your office. Some might interpret that as personal. Some might, I acknowledged. They would be mistaken. Michael sat back, studying me with an expression I recognized from our marriage, the calculating assessment he employed when recalibrating his approach. Your assistant mentioned you reviewed our prospectus. I did. And? And I have questions. About your pharmaceutical security protocol, I stated, watching his reaction carefully. The technical specifications suggest capabilities remarkably similar to proprietary Blackwell technology. His expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tensing of his jaw, a tell I'd learned to recognize during tense board negotiations. Great minds think alike, I suppose. Or some minds appropriate what others have created. I smiled to soften the accusation. Tell me about the engineers you hired from our Cambridge facility. Michael took a deliberate sip of wine before responding. Talented individuals seeking opportunities beyond Blackwell's restrictive research environment. They brought general expertise, not specific technologies. General expertise that mysteriously manifested as code nearly identical to our proprietary algorithms. A shadow of irritation crossed his face. If you're implying something improper, Victoria, perhaps we should end this dinner now. I'm not implying anything, I replied evenly. I'm stating facts. Facts that have also drawn the attention of the SEC, incidentally. That caught him off guard. A momentary widening of the eyes. A pause before reaching for his wine glass. The SEC? That's absurd. Helix has maintained perfect compliance with all securities regulations. Interesting, I murmured. I mentioned the SEC, and you immediately defended against securities violations. I could have been referring to their interest in intellectual property theft within the biotech sector. The first course arrived, providing Michael a moment to compose himself. Once we were alone again, he attempted to redirect the conversation. Let's not waste time on unfounded accusations, he said, his tone recalibrating to convey reasonable frustration. I asked for this meeting to discuss a potential strategic partnership that would benefit both our companies. By all means, I gestured for him to continue. I'm curious about how you envision this partnership. He launched into a carefully rehearsed presentation about synergies and market opportunities, technological complementarity, and scaled efficiencies. The same corporate poetry he'd employed throughout our marriage to obscure the substance of his propositions beneath layers of buzzing rhetoric. I listened patiently, noting each evasion and half-truth, each careful omission. When he finished, I took a deliberate moment before responding. That's certainly a compelling narrative, I acknowledged. But I'm more interested in Project Daedalus. The name landed like a stone dropping into still water, ripples of shock disrupting Michael's composed facade. He recovered quickly, but not before I registered the confirmation I needed. I'm not familiar with that project, he claimed, reaching for his water glass instead of his wine. How strange, I mused. According to Ms. Harmon, you discussed it quite explicitly last week with someone named Carson. His expression hardened. You've been talking to Cecilia. She came to me, I corrected him. Applied for a position, in fact. We had a most illuminating conversation. Michael set down his fork with deliberate care. Whatever she told you is likely misunderstood or exaggerated. She's been unstable recently, emotional, unreliable. Bruised, certainly, I replied, holding his gaze. Around the wrists, specifically. Quite distinctive markings. A dangerous stillness settled over him. The coiled tension I'd witnessed only a handful of times during our marriage, usually preceding his most calculated decisions. I'm concerned about where this conversation is heading, Victoria. As am I agreed. Because it appears my former husband is not only attempting to steal proprietary technology from my company, but is now developing an encryption protocol specifically designed to shield illegal pharmaceutical trials from regulatory oversight. His laugh held no humor. That's an extraordinary claim. With substantial evidence, I countered. The SEC found it compelling enough to open an investigation. The FBI's Cybercrimes Division is similarly interested, particularly given the national security implications of quantum encryption being deployed to circumvent federal regulations. "You're bluffing," he said, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "You don't have evidence because there's nothing to find." I removed my phone from my handbag, pulled up an audio file, and pressed play. Michael's voice emerged clearly. "Once Daedalus is implemented, the trial data will be completely shielded. The FDA won't even know what questions to ask, let alone how to access the information." I stopped the recording. Cecilia may be many things, but unreliable isn't one of them, at least not when it comes to protecting herself. The mask of civility slipped entirely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "What do you want, Victoria? Money? A public apology? Revenge for our marriage? Name your price." "My price," I said calmly, "is full disclosure of all intellectual property stolen from Blackwell Industries, immediate cessation of any attempts to deploy the Daedalus protocol, and your resignation from Helix Biomedical." He stared at me, incredulous. "You can't be serious?" "Deadly serious," I confirmed. "The documentation is prepared. You'll sign tonight, or I forward everything to the appropriate authorities, the SEC, the FBI, the FDA, your choice." "You would destroy a groundbreaking company out of personal vendetta," he accused. "I would protect my company, my employees, and the integrity of pharmaceutical regulations from someone willing to compromise all three for profit," I corrected him. "The fact that it's you merely makes it ironic, not personal." Michael leaned forward, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Victoria. The pharmaceutical companies backing this technology won't simply walk away. They've invested millions, made promises to shareholders. There are people involved who make me look positively benevolent by comparison." "Is that a threat?" "A reality check," he insisted. "These aren't startup founders or venture capitalists. These are people who disappeared a regulatory investigator in Jakarta last year when he asked too many questions about trial protocols." I felt a cold clarity descend, the final piece clicking into place. This isn't about competitive advantage or even corporate espionage. You're facilitating illegal human trials. His silence was confirmation enough. "Neurovitals experimental Alzheimer's treatment," I continued, thinking aloud. "The one that failed phase 2 trials due to severe neurological side effects. They're still testing it, aren't they? Without FDA approval, without patient-informed consent. You don't understand. The potential," Michael argued, his voice taking on a fervent quality I'd never heard before. "The treatment works, Victoria. Early results show 60% reversal of cognitive decline. Yes, there are side effects, but they're working through them. By experimenting on people who don't know they're test subjects," I concluded. "Using your encryption to hide the evidence." He sat back, seemingly relieved to stop pretending. "The regulatory pathway takes too long. People are dying while bureaucrats debate statistical significance and risk profiles. We're accelerating the inevitable. By breaking dozens of laws and violating the most basic ethical principles of medical research," I countered. "How many people have been harmed, Michael?" His expression turned calculating again. "Fewer than will be saved when the treatment is perfected. That's the calculation that matters." I studied him, this man I'd once shared my life with, wondering how I could have missed the moral void at his center. Had it always been there, carefully concealed beneath charm and ambition? Or had it developed after our separation, a corruption born of desperation and unchecked power? "Your documents," I said finally, removing a folder from my handbag and sliding it across the table. "Sign them." He made no move to take the folder. "And if I refuse?" "Then at 9 a.m. tomorrow, I deliver everything. The intellectual property theft, the Daedalus protocol, the illegal trials, to the authorities." I met his gaze steadily. "Your pharmaceutical partners may be dangerous, Michael, but they're also pragmatic. When the choice is between protecting you or protecting themselves, which do you think they'll choose? He considered this, fingers drumming, lightly against the tablecloth. You realize they'll come after you too. Blackwell Industries will become a target. We're prepared for that possibility. A bitter smile crossed his face. Always 3 steps ahead. I used to admire that about you, and I used to believe you had boundaries you wouldn't cross, I replied. We were both mistaken. He reached for the folder, opened it, and scanned the contents. Intellectual property assignment, confidentiality agreement, resignation letter. He looked up with a humorless laugh. You've thought of everything. Not everything, I admitted. I never imagined you capable of this level of ethical bankruptcy. Self-righteousness doesn't suit you, Victoria, he snapped, his composure finally cracking. You knew exactly who I was when you married me. The only difference now is that I'm no longer on your side. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps some part of me had recognized his capacity for moral flexibility and had valued it as an asset rather than a warning sign. It was a discomforting thought. Sign the documents, Michael. He pulled out a pen, hesitating before committing himself. What happens to Cecilia? The question surprised me. A flicker of genuine concern from someone I'd begun to view as pathologically self-interested. She'll be protected, provided she cooperates with our investigation. No charges will be filed against her. Something like relief crossed his features before vanishing beneath renewed calculation. And me? Once I sign these, what's to stop you from turning everything over to the authorities anyway? Nothing, I acknowledged. Except that prosecuting you publicly would risk exposing Blackwell's original Daedalus research. The board would prefer to avoid that scrutiny. Sign, disappear, and we consider the matter closed. He studied me for a long moment, perhaps searching for deception, perhaps simply memorizing my face. Then he signed each document with quick, angry strokes before pushing the folder back to me. You always did know exactly which pressure points to target, he observed, draining his wine glass. I'm almost impressed. Almost, I echoed, securing the signed documents in my handbag. But not quite. What happens now? Now you tender your resignation to Helix's board, effective immediately. You cite personal reasons, health concerns, I don't care which. You then transfer all research related to Daedalus to the secure server address in these documents. Once verified, you leave Boston. Tonight. He laughed, though the sound held no humor. Just like that? 11 years of marriage, 3 years building. Helix and I'm simply erased? You erased yourself, Michael, I corrected him. The moment you decided to steal from me, to abuse Cecilia, to facilitate illegal human experimentation, these are simply the consequences. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket in a gesture of composure I recognized as entirely performative. This isn't over, Victoria. For your sake, it should be, I replied calmly. The alternatives are considerably less pleasant. With a final look that mingled fury with something almost like respect, Michael Blackwell walked out of the private dining room and out of my life for the second time. I waited until he had disappeared from view before sending a pre-composed text to Xavier. Document secured. Subject departing. Maintain surveillance. The response came immediately. Acknowledged. Team in position. I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to sit quietly, processing the encounter and its implications. Then I gathered my things and departed, nodding to the discreet security personnel positioned throughout the restaurant. In the car, I reviewed the signed documents once more, confirming each signature was properly executed. My driver navigated toward Blackwell headquarters, where a small team would be waiting despite the late hour. My phone rang. Diane Chen, our Chief Information Security Officer. We've detected multiple access attempts to our Cambridge laboratory network, she reported without preamble. Someone's trying to delete research files remotely. Michael, I concluded. He's attempting to cover his tracks before departing. We've isolated the affected systems and deployed countermeasures, Diane assured me. No data has been compromised. Excellent. Have forensics document everything. The attempt itself may provide additional evidence if needed. I paused, considering the implications. Enhance security at all facilities immediately. If Michael's pharmaceutical partners learn he's been compromised, they may take direct action. After ending the call, I contacted Xavier again. Subject location? Helix headquarters, came the reply. Arrived 10 minutes ago. Building security reports he's accessing the main server room. As expected, I murmured. Maintain position, but do not interfere unless he attempts to flee. The car pulled into Blackwell's private garage, where Margot waited despite the late hour. She fell into step beside me as we entered the building. The team is assembled in the crisis room, she reported. Legal has reviewed the signed documents and confirms their binding. Security has implemented Protocol Erebus at all facilities. And Ms. Harmon? Secured at the Montreal location. She's been cooperative, providing additional details about Helix's partnerships with the pharmaceutical companies. The elevator ascended to the executive floor, opening directly into a specialized conference room we reserved for sensitive operations. Inside, senior representatives from legal, security, and digital forensics were gathered around a central table, multiple screens, displaying real-time information about Helix Biomedical's systems. Michael has initiated a data purge, reported our lead forensic analyst, gesturing to one screen showing cascading deletion commands. But we've already mirrored their servers through the backdoor Ms. Harmon provided. We're capturing everything before it's deleted. I took my place at the head of the table, scanning the assembled team. Status of Project Daedalus? Dr. Catherine Lin appeared on one of the screens via secure video link. We've identified the modifications Michael's team made to our original encryption protocols. They've essentially removed the safeguards we built in, the emergency access, keys that would allow regulatory oversight in case of suspected violations. Can it be countered? Dr. Lin nodded. We're developing a detection algorithm that could identify when the protocol is being used, even if we can't break the encryption itself. Think of it as a fingerprint recognition system. We can't read the content, but we can prove the encryption is being used. Estimated completion time? 72 hours for a prototype, 2 weeks for a validated version. Accelerate that timeline, I instructed. The pharmaceutical companies won't wait once they realize Michael has been compromised. James Forrester, our general counsel, cleared his throat. Ms. Blackwell, we should discuss the legal implications of what we've uncovered. There are mandatory reporting requirements for knowledge of illegal human trials. I'm aware, I assured him. Draft the necessary disclosures, but hold them for my review. We need to balance our legal obligations against the risk of retribution from these pharmaceutical companies. A notification appeared on the central screen, a secure message from Xavier. Subject has left Helix headquarters. Destination unknown. Surveillance continuing. I turned to Sofia Rodriguez, head of executive protection. Enhance security at Ms. Harmon's location. If Michael can't find her, he may attempt to use her as leverage. Sophia nodded, already typing instructions into her tablet. Additional team deploying now. We've also implemented countermeasures at your residence and installed temporary security. At your parents' home as a precaution? Good. I surveyed the room once more. Michael claimed his pharmaceutical partners disappeared a regulatory investigator in Jakarta. I want that verified and documented. Margot made a note on her tablet. I'll have our Jakarta office investigate discreetly. Another notification from Xavier appeared. Subject returning to residence, appears to be packing travel items. Perfect, I murmured. Let's ensure his departure is uneventful. For the next 3 hours, we monitored Michael's movements while systematically dismantling the infrastructure he'd built around the stolen Daedalus protocol. Our forensics team recovered deleted files, Our legal team prepared injunctions against the pharmaceutical companies, and our security team established protective parameters around key personnel and facilities. Shortly after midnight, Xavier reported that Michael had arrived at Logan International Airport, checking in for a flight to Zurich. By 1 a.m., his plane had departed American airspace. What now? Margot asked as the team began dispersing, leaving just the two of us in the crisis room. I studied the screens, one showing Michael's flight path across the Atlantic, another displaying the ongoing data recovery from Helix's servers, a third monitoring mentions of Blackwell Industries or Helix Biomedical across news and social media platforms. Now we prepare for the inevitable countermove, I replied. Michael may be retreating, but his pharmaceutical partners won't abandon their investment so easily, especially once they discover what we know about their illegal trials. You think they'll come after Blackwell directly? I think they'll explore all available options to protect themselves, I corrected her, which may include attempting to compromise our systems, discredit our leadership, or apply pressure through regulatory channels. Margot nodded, absorbing this assessment. Should we be concerned about Michael returning? I considered this question carefully, thinking about the man I'd confronted tonight, a man I once believed I knew intimately, now revealed as someone capable of facilitating human experimentation for profit. Michael is fundamentally a survivor. He'll align with whatever faction offers him the best protection. For now, that means distancing himself from the situation. And Ms. Harmon? Do we maintain her protective custody? Yes, but transition her to a consulting role in our Montreal office, I decided. Her knowledge of Helix's operations and Michael's methods makes her valuable, and visible employment with Blackwell provides a layer of protection that anonymity cannot. As Margot departed to implement these instructions, I remained alone in the crisis room, considering the day's developments. Michael had been neutralized, at least temporarily. Helix Biomedical would soon collapse without his leadership and with its core technology compromised. The immediate threat to Blackwell Industries had been contained, but the pharmaceutical companies, Neurovital, Chimera Therapeutics, Biosolve International, remained unknown quantities. Entities willing to conduct illegal human trials would have few qualms about targeting a corporate rival who threatened their operations. I pulled up the dossiers our intelligence team had compiled on each company, their leadership, financial structure, political connections, history of legal controversies. The pattern was consistent: aggressive expansion, minimal regulatory compliance, strategic use of jurisdictional differences to evade oversight. These were not adversaries to underestimate. My phone vibrated with a text from an unlisted number. Arrived safely in Zurich. You've won this round, Victoria. Enjoy it while it lasts. Michael, using a burner phone, unable to resist having the last word. I didn't respond, instead forwarding the message to our security team for documentation. Michael's psychological need to maintain contact might prove useful in tracking his movements and anticipating his next move. The night stretched toward dawn as I continued working, developing contingencies for each potential scenario, allocating resources for the battles to come. This confrontation with Michael had exposed vulnerabilities in our security, our personnel, management, our competitive intelligence, weaknesses that needed to be addressed before our next challenge arose. By 5 a.m., as the first gray light of morning illuminated the Boston skyline, I had outlined a comprehensive strategy for the coming weeks: enhanced security protocols, accelerated development of our own pharmaceutical trial oversight technologies, strategic communications to position Blackwell Industries as a leader in ethical research practices. The immediate danger had passed, but I harbored no illusions about the fragility of our victory. Michael had been contained, but the forces that enabled his ethical compromises remained active. The pharmaceutical companies that had partnered with him would soon discover their vulnerability and respond accordingly. 72 hours after, Michael fled to Zurich. I stood before Blackwell Industries' board of directors in our main conference room, the morning sun casting long shadows across the polished table. The situation has been contained, I informed them, gesturing to the financial projections displayed on the central screen. Helix Biomedical's board has accepted Michael's resignation and is currently conducting emergency fundraising to avoid immediate collapse. Eleanor Wright, our longest-serving board member and my father's former mentor, leaned forward. And the intellectual property concerns? Resolved, I replied, advancing to the next slide. We've secured signed agreements transferring all derivative technologies back to Blackwell. Our legal team has filed protective patents on the modified algorithms to prevent similar attempts in the future. The tension in the room noticeably diminished. For most board members, the threat had been primarily financial, intellectual property, theft that could have damaged our market position and shareholder value. Only the executive committee had been briefed on the more disturbing elements involving illegal pharmaceutical trials. There is, however, a secondary concern we need to address, I continued, signaling Margot to distribute sealed folders to each board member. The information in these packets is classified at the highest level. Please review it now. Silence fell as they examined the contents. Detailed evidence of the pharmaceutical company's illegal trials, the modified Daedalus protocol's role in concealing these activities, and our vulnerability as the original developers of the technology. Lawrence Chen, head of our audit committee, was the first to look up, his expression grave. These allegations? They're substantiated? Fully, I confirmed. 3 independent sources, documentary evidence, network traffic analysis. We've verified everything twice. My God, Eleanor whispered, still reading. Human trials without consent? In American facilities? And international ones, I clarified. We've identified locations in Jakarta, Guatemala City, and a remote site in Estonia, each carefully selected for minimal regulatory oversight and maximum deniability. The mood in the room darkened further as the full implications became clear. Bernard Walsh, our newest board member and former FDA commissioner, removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. We have a legal obligation to report this, he stated flatly. We do, I agreed. And we will. But timing and approach matter. These companies have billions in market capitalization and significant political influence. A misstep could expose Blackwell to both legal liability and physical risk. Physical risk, Eleanor repeated incredulously. Victoria, are you suggesting these pharmaceutical companies would resort to violence? I'm stating it explicitly, I replied. We have credible evidence linking Neurovital to the disappearance of a regulatory investigator in Jakarta last year. And Michael himself confirmed they would protect their interests by any means necessary. This revelation shifted the atmosphere from concern to alarm. I allowed them a moment to process before continuing. I've developed a comprehensive strategy to manage this situation, I explained, advancing to the final presentation slides. It balances our legal obligations, security concerns, and business interests while ensuring these illegal activities are ultimately exposed and halted. Over the next 30 minutes, I outlined the plan in detail. A carefully orchestrated disclosure to specific regulatory authorities, concurrent security enhancements at all Blackwell facilities, strategic communications to distance our company from the original Daedalus research, and protective measures for key personnel. When I finished, the board fell silent, each member weighing the implications of what I'd proposed. Finally, Bernard spoke. This goes beyond business, Victoria. This is a matter of public health and safety, potentially thousands of unwitting test subjects suffering side effects from unregulated experiments. I'm acutely aware of the ethical dimensions, I assured him. Which is why our plan includes anonymous support for the victims through medical foundations. But a misstep in our approach could result in these companies burying evidence before authorities can act. Eleanor studied me with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated generations of executives. This situation, your involvement feels personal. Your ex-husband, his assistant. Are you certain your judgment isn't compromised? The question was fair, if uncomfortable. I met her gaze directly. My personal connection provided the initial intelligence that exposed this conspiracy, I acknowledged. But every decision since has been guided by what's best for this company and the public interest. I've recused myself from any elements where my history with Michael might cloud my judgment. She nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then we approve Victoria's strategy as outlined, with the executive committee maintaining oversight of implementation. The vote was unanimous, though I noted the concern that lingered in several board members' expressions as they departed. Their discomfort was understandable. We had ventured beyond the familiar territory of market competition into something darker and more consequential. As the boardroom emptied, Bernard remained behind, waiting until we were alone before speaking. In my 12 years at the FDA, I encountered similar situations: pharmaceutical companies cutting corners, concealing data, prioritizing profit over safety. His voice carried the weight of difficult memories. But never anything this systemic, this deliberate. Does that change your assessment of our approach? I asked. He considered the question carefully. No, your strategy is sound, but be prepared. When this becomes public, the blowback will be unprecedented. These companies won't go down quietly. I'm counting on it, I replied. 1 week later, I sat in my office reviewing the latest intelligence report. As predicted, our carefully orchestrated disclosure to selected regulatory authorities had set in motion a cascade of events that were now beyond anyone's control. The FDA had executed simultaneous warrants at Neurovital's facilities in Boston, San Diego, and Philadelphia. The European Medicines Agency had frozen Chimera Therapeutics assets pending investigation. Biosolve International's CEO had been detained while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country, and Cecilia Harmon, now installed in our Montreal office as a research consultant, had provided testimony to a closed Senate committee, detailing everything she knew about the illegal trials and Michael's involvement in concealing them. Ms. Blackwell, Margot announced from the doorway. Dr. Lin is here with the Daedalus countermeasure update. Catherine entered, carrying a secure tablet. Despite working through 5 consecutive days without meaningful rest, she appeared energized, her eyes bright with the particular intensity that signaled a breakthrough. We've done it, she announced without preamble, placing the tablet on my desk. We've developed a detection algorithm that can identify when the Daedalus protocol is being used, even without accessing the encrypted data itself. I reviewed the technical specifications, noting the elegant simplicity of the solution. Deployment timeline? We can have it integrated into standard regulatory monitoring systems within 48 hours, Catherine replied. We've designed it as a background process that can scan network traffic without detection. Once installed, it will identify any instance of the Daedalus encryption pattern and flag it for investigation. Perfect. I made a note to update the executive committee. Any indications that Michael maintained access to the technology after leaving Helix? Catherine hesitated before answering. We've detected what might be a variant of the protocol being tested from servers in Zurich. It's evolved somehow. Michael appears to be attempting to rebuild Daedalus from memory. This was concerning but not entirely unexpected. Michael's intimate knowledge of the original Daedalus research made him valuable to anyone interested in resuming the illegal trials. Implement the countermeasure immediately, I instructed, and alert our intelligence team about the Zurich connection. After Catherine departed, I turned my chair to face the window, considering the implications. Michael was rebuilding his position, likely with support from elements within the pharmaceutical companies that hadn't yet been implicated. The question was whether he was acting on his own initiative or being coerced by those who had invested in the original conspiracy. My phone buzzed with a message from Xavier. Jakarta contact confirms. Regulatory investigator Zhang not disappeared, in protective custody, prepared to testify about neurovital trials. This was a significant development, potentially shifting the narrative from corporate wrongdoing to active obstruction of justice and attempted silencing of whistleblowers. I forwarded the information to our legal team for integration into our disclosure strategy. A soft chime indicated an incoming video call request from our Montreal facility. I accepted, and Cecilia's face appeared on my screen, her expression serious. "Victoria, I've just received a message from Michael," she began without greeting. "He's requesting a secure call, claims he has critical information about Neurovital's response plans." "Did you respond?" She shook her head. "Following protocol. All communications documented and reported immediately." "Good. I considered the possibilities. This may be a genuine attempt to provide intelligence, or it could be a trap, either to locate you or to feed us misleading information. What do you want me to do?" "Accept the call," I decided. "Our technical team will monitor for any attempt to trace the connection. Tell him you're considering your options post-Helix and want to understand the landscape before making decisions." After the call ended, I contacted security to enhance monitoring around our Montreal facility. Michael's sudden interest in communicating with Cecilia represented either an opportunity or a threat, possibly both simultaneously. The afternoon brought a flurry of developments. Neurovital's stock had plummeted 68% following the FDA raid, triggering trading halts and margin calls. 2 Chimera Therapeutics board members had resigned, releasing statements distancing themselves from the company's recently revealed activities. Biosolve's primary research facility in Guatemala had mysteriously caught fire, destroying unknown quantities of records and research materials. The pharmaceutical companies were in full damage control mode, sacrificing lower-level executives while the architects of the illegal trials attempted to erase evidence of their involvement. It was a predictable response, one we had anticipated and prepared for. At precisely 4 p.m., Margot appeared in my doorway. "Director Roberts from the FBI Cybercrimes Division is on line 1. Says it's urgent." I accepted the call, placing it on speaker. "Director Roberts, what can I do for you?" "Ms. Blackwell," his voice was tense, "we've detected a sophisticated cyber attack targeting Blackwell Industries' main research servers. The attack signature matches known state-sponsored actors, but our analysis suggests it's a false flag, likely private entities using state-developed tools." "The pharmaceutical companies," I concluded. "That would be my assessment," he agreed. "Have you implemented the security protocols we discussed?" "Fully deployed last week," I assured him. "The attacking entities are accessing a quarantined environment containing carefully curated information. Our actual research data remains secure." There was a pause, then. "You anticipated this attack?" "We assessed it as a high-probability response once the FDA raids began," I explained. "These companies are desperate to determine exactly what evidence we possess and what we've provided to regulatory authorities." "Well, your preparation may have prevented a significant breach," Roberts acknowledged. "We'll continue monitoring the situation and coordinate with your security team." After ending the call, I contacted Sofia Rodriguez. "The expected cyber attack is underway. Implement Phase 2 of our defensive strategy." "Already in progress," she confirmed. "We're using the attack to gather intelligence on their methods and objectives. Would you like a preliminary assessment?" "Please." "The attack is sophisticated but rushed. They're making mistakes that suggest urgency rather than careful planning. They're particularly focused on accessing files related to our communications with regulatory authorities. They're trying to determine what we've disclosed and to whom," I noted. "That suggests they're still hoping to contain the situation rather than simply destroying evidence." "Agreed," Sophia replied. "We're feeding them carefully constructed data that should fragment their response efforts. Each attacking entity will receive slightly different information about which authorities have which evidence." "Perfect," I checked the time. Nearly 5 p.m. What's the status of Michael's call with Cecilia? Scheduled for 6 p.m. Montreal time. All monitoring systems are in place. I ended the call and turned to the daily intelligence briefing on my desk. Michael's activities in Zurich had been closely monitored. Meetings with former Neurovital executives, attempts to access banking, systems linked to offshore accounts, communications with individuals connected to pharmaceutical companies in emerging markets. He was rebuilding his network, positioning himself as someone who could resurrect the Daedalus Protocol despite Blackwell's countermeasures. The question was whether he was doing so as a freelance opportunist or as part of a coordinated response by the implicated pharmaceutical companies. At precisely 6 p.m. Montreal time, my secure tablet alerted me that Cecilia's call with Michael had connected. I activated the live monitoring feed, observing as Michael's face appeared on the split screen. He looked tired, the confident facade worn thin by a week of crisis. His location appeared to be a hotel room, expensive but anonymous, the pulled curtains suggesting a desire for privacy. "Cecilia," he began, his voice carrying the practiced warmth he deployed when seeking cooperation. "Thank you for taking my call." "What do you want, Michael?" Her tone was cool, professional, exactly as we had rehearsed. "To warn you," he replied, leaning closer to the camera, "Neurovital and the others. They're looking for someone to blame. Your name has come up in several discussions." "My name? I never had any direct involvement with those companies." "But you had access to documents, meetings, communications," he pointed out. "From their perspective, you're a liability, someone who could have copied incriminating evidence before departing." Cecilia's expression remained carefully neutral. "And why are you telling me this? Concern for my welfare seems inconsistent with your recent behavior." A flash of irritation crossed Michael's features before disappearing beneath renewed charm. "Despite everything, I don't want to see you hurt. These companies play by different rules than we're used to in the corporate world." "Like disappearing regulatory investigators?" she asked pointedly. Michael's surprise was evident. He hadn't expected her to have that specific information. "So Victoria has briefed you thoroughly," he observed, recalibrating his approach. "Then you understand the seriousness of the situation." "What I understand is that you're calling because you want something," Cecilia replied. "Let's skip to that part." He smiled, the genuine smile that emerged when someone exceeded his expectations. "Direct as always. Fine. I need access to Victoria's current countermeasures against Daedalus, the detection algorithm her team has developed." "Why would, I have access to that?" "Because you're working for her now," he stated with absolute certainty. "Probably in the Montreal office, where Blackwell maintains its most sensitive research operations. Victoria values loyalty. She would keep you close." Our intelligence team had been meticulous in concealing Cecilia's exact location and role, which meant Michael had independent sources within Blackwell Industries, a concerning development that would require investigation. "Even if that were true," Cecilia said carefully, "why would I help you? You set me up to take the fall at Helix, Michael. You documented my involvement while concealing your own." His expression turned conciliatory. "A contingency plan I never intended to use." "Business requires preparing for all scenarios, Cecilia. You know that. Including scenarios where I'd be blamed for criminal conspiracy while you walked away clean," she observed. "Not particularly motivating me to help you now." Michael sighed, the carefully crafted persona slipping to reveal genuine frustration. "The situation has evolved. Neurovital and the others are consolidating their response. They have resources that make Blackwell Industries look like a startup. When they identify Victoria as the primary threat, the response will be decisive." "Are you threatening Victoria now?" "I'm describing reality," he insisted. "These companies can't afford the exposure she's orchestrating. They've invested billions in research that operates in regulatory gray areas. If Victoria thinks they'll simply accept public disgrace and criminal prosecution, she's fatally mistaken. Cecilia maintained her composed expression, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A detente," Michael replied. "I provide Victoria with information about Neurovital's planned countermeasures. In exchange, you provide me with technical details about Blackwell's Daedalus detection algorithm. So you can help these companies circumvent it." He shook his head. "So I can modify it, create a version that allows legitimate research to proceed while still flagging genuinely dangerous applications. A compromise that protects public safety without destroying billions in potentially life-saving research." It was a masterful performance, appealing to ethical considerations while obscuring his true objectives. The Michael I remembered from our marriage, blending truth and manipulation so seamlessly that distinguishing between them became nearly impossible. "I'll need to consider this carefully," Cecilia replied, following our prepared script. "These companies have already demonstrated they're willing to conduct illegal human trials. Why would I trust any compromise that allows them to continue operating?" "Because the alternative is worse," Michael stated flatly. "If forced into a corner, they'll abandon any pretense of ethical constraints. At least this way, some oversight remains possible." "I'll think about it," she concluded. "I'll need details about these alleged countermeasures before I make any decisions." "I'll prepare a secure document," Michael agreed, seemingly satisfied with this incremental progress. "But don't wait too long. Events are accelerating." After the call ended, I contacted Cecilia directly. "Well done. Exactly the right balance of reluctance and consideration." "He's desperate," she observed. "I've never seen him this transparent about his motivations." "Because he's caught between powerful entities with conflicting demands," I explained. "The pharmaceutical companies expect him to neutralize the threat we pose, while his own survival instincts are pushing him toward self-preservation." "Do you think his warnings about their response are genuine?" "Partially," I acknowledged. "Exaggerated for effect, but based in reality. These companies have demonstrated they operate outside legal and ethical boundaries when their interests are threatened. What's our next move?" "You'll provide Michael with carefully constructed technical details, enough to seem cooperative without actually compromising our detection capabilities. Meanwhile, we'll use his warning to enhance our security posture and accelerate our disclosure timeline." After concluding the call, I sat back in my chair, reviewing the complex chessboard that had emerged from what had initially seemed a simple corporate espionage attempt. Michael, the pharmaceutical companies, regulatory authorities, our own board, each represented variables in an equation that grew more complex by the hour. My intercom buzzed. Margot, still at her desk despite the late hour. "Ms. Blackwell, there's been a development at Neurovital. Their CEO has just been found dead in his Manhattan apartment. Initial reports suggest suicide, but the timing is suspicious," I finished for her. "Contact our intelligence team. I want everything they can gather about the circumstances, especially any indications of destroyed or missing documents. This development would accelerate all timelines. The pharmaceutical companies were entering the most dangerous phase of crisis management, eliminating liabilities and consolidating control of information. We needed to move more quickly than anticipated. I initiated a secure message to all members of our crisis response team. Implement Omega Protocol immediately. Full disclosure package to all regulatory authorities within 12 hours. Maximum security measures for all key personnel. The message sent, I turned to face the nighttime Boston skyline, city lights reflecting off the harbor waters. 3 weeks ago, Cecilia Harmon had walked into my office seeking a job recommendation, setting in motion events that had exposed a conspiracy of breathtaking scope and ruthlessness. My phone buzzed with an incoming text, an unlisted European number I recognized as Michael's latest burner phone. Neurovital CEO situation, not what it appears. We need to talk. urgent. I considered ignoring it, then typed a response. Blackwell Secure Channel, 1 hour, one-time connection. His reply came immediately. Will be there. I set the phone down, thinking about the path that had led to this moment. Michael had betrayed me personally and professionally, had stolen from my company, had aligned himself with entities willing to conduct illegal human experimentation. Yet now circumstances had forced him into the role of potential ally against an even greater threat. Life's ironies never cease to amaze me. My office door opened, and Margot entered with the updated security briefing. All protective measures are in place. The disclosure packages are being finalized for distribution to regulatory authorities. And Project Daedalus? Dr. Lin confirms the detection algorithm has been successfully deployed to all major regulatory monitoring systems. Any attempt to use the protocol will trigger immediate alerts. I nodded, satisfied that we had done everything possible to contain the threat posed by the rogue pharmaceutical companies and their illegal research. One more thing, I said as Margot turned to leave. Schedule a board meeting for tomorrow morning. It's time to discuss the next phase of our strategy. Which is? She asked, curiosity overcoming her usual professional reserve. I smiled, thinking about the complex sequence of events that had begun with Cecilia's job application and would end with the complete transformation of pharmaceutical research oversight. Restructuring an industry, I replied simply. After all, the most effective revenge wasn't just neutralizing a specific threat, it was creating systems that prevented such threats from emerging again. Michael had taught me that lesson, however. Unintentionally, and I had always been an excellent student. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.